Real people, real opinions.
Real Talk Radio. The multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.
Ireland's classic hits.
At this time of the show, we normally have a guest in, and I never know who it is, usually until late in the evening. And to my surprise, I started feeling extremely old, actually, when Jane told me that there's a chap called, you might know him, his name is Gerry Creighton. Sorry, Jay, make sure you turn down that laptop there because, his name is Gerry Creighton. And I know Gerry a long, long time. Gerry worked in Dublin Zoo for 36 years, which makes me feel really old because I can remember the very, very start when I met Gerry first. And that was in the nightclub industry, going back a long time ago. We'll get to that in a minute. But he's just released a book, and you'll know Gerry, by the way, because if you've watched the TV show The Zoo, he's the red-headed lad. You can't miss him. He stands out a mile. Sorry, Gerry, I'm coming to you now. Yeah. But his new book is out. It's called Raised by the Zoo, My Life with Elephants and Other Animals. Gerry, welcome along.
Great to be with you, Niall. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been quite a crazy few weeks with the launch of the book, but it's been so warmly received and some really, really amazing reviews. And yeah, it was great to get a chance to tell, a story that began many years ago as a second-generation zookeeper.
Yeah, well, let's go back to the start. So your dad was, of course, the original zookeeper there, Gerry Senior.
Yes, indeed. And so you used to go up to the zoo. Obviously, with my dad, we were local. We lived in Ivor Street, which was only, a few minutes away from the zoo. And in them days, it was great. Like, health and safety was completely different. And all the zookeepers' kids would go up to the zoo at the weekends and hang out in the pets' corner and get to work with, young animals and help around. And it
was a very different zoo in those days.
Oh, very different. I mean, there's absolutely no comparison. And I kind of depict that very well in the book about the awful 80s, really, when, what we were was a Victorian zoo with a whole range of...
I always remember the polar bear. Everybody remembers the poor polar bear.
Yeah.
He was in this enclosure, kind of white, kind of painted rock, and he'd get into the water, go up and down a little bit, get back out of the water, get into the water, go up and down a bit, go back out of the water. And it was probably a terrible existence for the poor animal.
Totally agree. It was that, and thankfully that was one of the things that was dealt with, and we moved on from keeping that particular species because they were designed. That was an old lion enclosure built in the 50s, and the cat. There was no real thought process or understanding of the animal's psychology or biology or physiology like there is today, and how we design appropriately based on the species requirements, how they interact with the environment, what they need to function as a correct species. It's a completely different zoo to when I was there, as I say, because they were cages with bars and steel and glass, and now you look at the likes of the gorilla habitat, 15,000 plants, 200 different species, all edible for the gorillas. They can.
And you have to import all those plants.
Yeah, all these different. Stephen Butler and the horticulture team done an incredible job. He was the head of the horticulture at the time, and it is recognised as one of the most species appropriate habitats in the world for gorillas. And not only so it's huge difference. And before they were in an old fishbowl type where they were. It was awful. It was awful.
Yeah, with the glass cracked because they were banging on it every now and again.
Exactly. They just were not appropriate. But, we had to go through it, a lot of transformation. Peter Wilson, who was the director then in the 80s, he got government support, 90s. Bertie Ahern then with the Taoiseach, the zoo was in his constituency. He took an interest in it, proper funding. Then we got the African...
Did he give you that out of his own bank account?
Yeah, the brown envelope. Then we got the proper land in the African plains, which is the Orson Ukteron. Then a director, Leo Oosterwegel, which was a Dutchman, he had great vision for the zoo and he had international experience. And there was a whole wind of change, and it changed for the people of Ireland. And it now is one of the most beautiful zoos that has a real significant role in conservation, education.
I was going to get to this. Okay, so we've had the debate on the air, Gerry, a load of times, and I'm going to come back to your childhood in a minute. But
sure.
We've had the debate, about, because I know there was a Sinn Féin representative in the north said that Belfast Zoo should close. And, they should do it over a 50-year period by just not renewing any of the animals. They said the same. A Labour MP said it in Britain too, that the days of zoos are over, that it's an outdated Victorian idea, and that nowadays with Discovery Channel, with YouTube, with everything that people have, AI now, they can nearly interact in the cage with an animal or interact in the wild with an animal. That do we really need zoos? Because the purpose of a zoo for visitors was to see an animal up close, to almost smell it, to almost touch it, to see the animal interacting. But now we don't have that purpose anymore. And I suppose animal activists are probably your enemy. they would say it's unnecessary. How do you argue with that? It's difficult to argue with that, isn't it?
No, it's not difficult to argue at all when you look at the current situations that are happening globally for many species and communities. And it's a very anachronistic view of zoos without really having a full understanding of what the role of the modern zoo is. The IUCN just came out the other day, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which is a very credible, one of the most recognised scientific bodies in the world that analyses populations and plans for many species across the world, and they have adamantly they've supported the role of the modern zoo and what it does. It's more than just a zoo now, and there's genetics. Like, for example, just to give you, like Sumatran tiger or Moor tiger, there's only a few hundred individuals left. All the zoos get together every year. They work on genetics, reproduction, science, research, working with communities across the globe. Like Dublin Zoo, for example, has a 10-year conservation plan. I've been to the wild. Like, there is no such thing as the wild anymore. Even in Africa, the parks are managed. I was there in the Kaziranga National Park when we had to stop the traffic to allow elephants cross the road to go to an area that there. 70% of the tuskers in Africa, in India, have been killed. Every 15 minutes there's an African elephant killed. Every single day, 60, 70 per day for ivory. Now, absolutely, people were right to question the old method of zoos and how they were managed and how they were run. But you need to look at it now with fresh eyes. You need to look at the broader picture of how zoos are working together collectively. EASA, the European Association of Zoos and Aquarium, coming together. Like this week alone, some of the great work going on in the UK. 20 Scottish wildcats reintroduced from the Highland Safari Park. Beavers are back in the river that were released from zoos in the UK. Bison back in Kent that have been released from zoos. So, zoos are changing. And
can you release an animal back into the wild? Because if an animal is raised in a zoo, maybe I'm wrong in thinking this, if an animal is raised in the zoo, does it still have its natural instincts if you just fling it out into a jungle somewhere?
A great question. There has to be a very deep strategy and a deep plan. And I'm currently training 13 African elephants in Howlett's Wild Animal Park in the UK. This is a world first for them to be returned to Shimba Hills in Kenya, the first time they've ever gone back from a zoo. So that will be just not that they're dropped into Africa. They will go into a 50-acre reserve first, get used to the climate, the food, and we're training them for the travel crates. So I've been training the team so when they go into the travel crates, the door closes behind them, they're desensitised to the move, they're prepared psychologically, physically. But the Scottish wildcat is a great example. Like they would be fed appropriately. They've all been released back into the wild. It's a management and a strategy.
That's some crate, by the way, to lift an elephant. Then what does an elephant weigh?
Well, yeah, the average female elephant would be 5 to 6 tons. So, so it's good to have them trained. So people just have to have a little bit more of an open mind. And people were right to question them. But zoos, the modern zoo, is a fundamental asset when you look at what's going on in the wild. I mean,
but I think questioning zoos keeps the pressure on.
Correct.
I mean, when you look at, say, for example, SeaWorld in Florida. I mean, they came out under serious question after that documentary came out, of course, in relation to what was happening to the whales. Now, you've seen that SeaWorld now have pulled back on animals. It's more about roller coasters and everything else. And they've kind of pulled back on the animals. They don't seem to be bringing in as many as they used to. So they're treating the animals probably a little bit better as well. So there is, when we do question it, it keeps the pressure on to make sure they're treated properly.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's no doubt about that. But I just want, like some of the projects I'm involved in, for example, I'm working with Melbourne Zoo now in Australia. Melbourne have realised that the elephants in the Melbourne City Zoo, they need a lot more space, and now they're moving them out to Werribee Open Range, which is a zoo out in the countryside with a 40-acre site for elephants. 40 acres,
because they naturally walk.
They naturally walk. 18 hours a day they're searching, they're looking for food. I'm working at the Al-Ain Zoo in the UAE, where we had to take the elephants were taken in because of human-elephant conflict. And 100 elephants were sold by the Namibian government because they were going to be shot because of human-elephant conflict. So they took them into the zoo there, and we have a 17, 18 hectare spot. And it's about creating destinations and journeys for the elephants every day. Topography changes where they come out, they say, oh, which way do I go today? Resource movement, looking for food, looking for opportunities. It's a whole whole different psychology, and it's based up with credible research. Like even in Dublin, we done locomotion studies, sleep studies, foraging studies on the elephants, and it was all comparable with wild elephants. Now, I'm not trying to say the wild would be a better place, and I would love to think in Ireland that, at some time in my lifetime, that zoos would not be needed. But the point is, the wild is no longer the wild like what we imagine.
It's not a safe place for a lot of them.
It's not a safe place. Every 15 minutes, like I just said to you, an African elephant is butchered.
And it's not just African elephants, it's rhinos as well, of course.
The modern zoo has, for like the conservation projects in the wild, supporting communities, supporting, legislation for research and change.
And what about their own habitats? Are we still destroying them at a rate that we used to destroy them before, or has that slowed down a bit?
Massively. Unfortunately, like in India, because of the population, India, for example, which is a very dynamic, ecosystem, because there's so many people, it's going to surpass China as the most populous country in the world now. And elephants and lions, elephants and tigers and the Indian lion are all suffering. There's only 400 Indian lions left. They're pushed into one little pocket in the Gir Forest. And again, Dublin Zoo has been fundamental and very successful in breeding them animals, and hopefully for reintroductions again in the future. So people are right, and they're right to look at the zoo to make sure that the ethics are there. But I can reassure them about, like certainly the zoos I've been associated with, that transformation is so significant over the last decades, and it's all about, it's a conservation body now that's looking after a zoo, and its tentacles go far and wide.
Does it make money? I mean, well, I know during COVID it was a bad time. There was 2.5 years there where there was a lot of money lost, and I'm sure it costs a lot of money to run a zoo. I have no idea per month how much it costs to feed animals, but I'm sure it's quite substantial. And that's not just the feeding, it's the veterinary services, it's the horticultural services, it's everything that goes along with the maintenance, everything. So is it expensive to run a zoo?
It's absolutely huge. I mean, obviously, Dublin Zoo suffered greatly during the time of COVID. The bill would be over 100,000 a month between food and feeding and, staff, everything. It's a very significant operation. But lucky enough, with the Zoo TV show, which has been started 12, 13 years ago, every year the zoo has over 1 million visitors, and it quickly recovered, and it got support from the government, and it got support, helped out. So because people understand it, it's been really embedded in
that
Irish.
TV show must have been sold to a load of stuff. I see it randomly on odd channels on Sky every now and again.
It's been phenomenal. And the great thing about that is, and that's why people need to watch it. With the director then, also Leo Oosterweigel said, it's going to be everything. It's everything. Like we euthanized a lioness on the TV program because she was old, and explained why. And we show the monkey carrying her dead baby and why it happened. The whole trials and tribulations of zoo life were shown in an honest format, and people loved that emotional roller coaster ride. It was exactly what zoo life is about: animals coming, animals going, transfers, births, deaths, all these reasons. So very, very important. And as I say, the Dublin Zoo that I worked at in the kid of the 80s to the zoo that's there now. I'm not the official spokesperson. I just have a long history there.
You sound like one. Yes, you have a huge passion. And let me go back to this passion you have.
Sorry,
just listening to you talking, Gerry, you're obsessed with it. You have a passion for the animals. So there's no question that you really care. But you cared so much when you were younger, and this is when I knew you, when you were in your early 20s, right? You were bringing the animals home to the house with you. The animals were raised in your house.
That's literally raised. There was nothing unusual about having lions or tigers under the bed, or a chimpanzee or a gorilla hanging on the end of the bed either.
I remember you telling me years ago you had to change the gorilla's nappy every day.
It was for hygiene reasons. They were like a baby to get fed every 2 or 3 hours. And thankfully, even now, that's all changed because of much better keeping of animals and better facilities.
Do you still bring them home every now and again?
No, it's very rare now because there's a different strategy. Like what we call now is assisted feeding, where in the past where we would have taken them away, now you can actually supplementary feed and leave them in, because if they are taken for too long, it can have an impact on how they behave. Chimps need to be with chimps, not out in the house in Cabra. That's where they need to be. But the point is, we had a strategy and a plan for them to get them back in and reintroduced, and now it's handled differently. But it was an amazing experience to share your
And what was it like for your mum and dad and for the rest of the kids and the rest of the Creighton family to have monkeys running around the house?
Sure, but it used to be so, when we had Rena, who was an orangutan living with us too, and she used to sit in a baby seat in the back of the car when we'd be driving into the zoo, and of course people would look at me at the traffic lights with the red hair, and her in the baby seat with the red hair, and they say it was a very confusing situation. But
they were either saying that's either a monkey or a very ugly child.
Yeah, that's it.
One or the other.
It was amazing. That it's great to be able to tell these stories in the book.
Because and one of the stories I mentioned earlier on was when we knew each other a long time ago. And again, I want to point out this is a long time ago. It's about 30 years ago now. Probably a little bit more, actually.
Yeah, indeed.
The Harp Bar.
Yeah,
And
that was Millie. That was
we had a jungle night or something. I can't remember what it was. But you're standing outside with a lion
Yeah.
on a lead.
That's exactly what you see in them days. Unfortunately, the zoo had limited ways of promoting itself, not like social media. Oh, you'd never do things like that now. But yeah, the animals would go to events like the supermarkets, the RDS. There was events that you would bring animals along because that's what the zoo was only way of getting its name and advertising. And you look back now, you'd reflect, and absolutely, you wouldn't do it now, and it was different. But they were hand reared. That was a hand.
Imagine if he had to get off the lead.
I know,
lion
that
missing in
line that I
Dublin.
was, it was reared at the time. Very different nowadays, but still, incredible stories that.
And I got a wonderful experience because I met you one day in the zoo and you had a bit of spare time, so you kind of gave me a backstage tour, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what it was I rubbed. It could have been a panther or it could have been a snow leopard. Was it a snow leopard?
I'd say it was a snow. Yeah, it'd be the snow leopard Patrice that we hand raised too. It was a beautiful animal.
And you let me rub it, and then you said to me, "Let it lick your face." I said, "I will not."
No, they're amazing. But you see, these are very unique experiences, aren't they? Really, when you're still talking about it all this time after.
Yeah.
That's the power of animals. That's the power of what animals do.
So what's the future now for Dublin Zoo? I mean, is it still a financial struggle, by the way?
But no, as I say, I officially left the zoo over 2 years ago to set up my own global elephant care business as a consultant working all around the world. But I'm always very fortunate to follow what's going on there. The zoo has a new director who's very conscious on conservation and is going to bring it to a new level of conservation. There's still a great team there. It's very viable. The July this year, there was a washout, so they're down some figures. But, it always pulls back, and it is a very, very sleek operation now. It'll always need support, but it's doing very, very well, both on internationally. It really is a zoo of standards and quality that is right up there with the world's best. And I don't say that lightly because I travel to so many zoos, and that's the great thing, as I mentioned in the book, is that evolution of literally. I remember, this is true, I remember us going on a Friday and Saturday in the 80s to supermarkets like Super Quinn, and we were collecting all the food from the displays that they would use, like at the salad bar, and using it to feed animals. Such was how the poverty really at the zoo at the time.
How desperate you were.
How desperate it was, and they were running events like to save money. But now, it's such a vibrant place. It's got such a positive role in Ireland and globally. I'm very proud of the time I spent there. And
what was your saddest moment in all the years that you were there?
I had a very sad moment which I mentioned in the book. And you never set out in life to harm an animal, but there was, again, things were done different. Like nowadays, if an animal has been moved away, like a rhino or an elephant, you get the travel crate in many months in advance, and you train them every day to go back and forward into it, so they don't have to be sedated or darted. On the day they walk in and you close the gate. But many, many years ago, 96 I think it was, and Dorothy was a rhino that was going to the UK. And she was being going over on part of a breeding loan, but she got it was 2 o'clock in the day, there was people in the zoo, but we always bring a firearms response team to a large animal being moved. For obvious reasons.
Just in case.
Just in case. And unfortunately, she got into a really panic as she got onto the side of the truck as she was being loaded. And again, it would never happen. But she disintegrated the side of the truck, and she came out the side and she came charging fully at me. And unfortunately, I had to shoot her. And I'll never forget that day. It was the saddest day ever in my life. Something you'd never want to do. But there was people in the park, and we had to do it right. But then, as I say, thankfully, none of that would never happen because training and appropriate, safety and health and safety riskments are done. There's pre-brought in, and every aspect.
Yeah, times change.
Times change, and thankfully, but that was a.
And that must have broke your heart then, because you cared so much about the animals.
Of
It must have
course.
broke your heart.
It was heartbreaking to do that and to see that. I never forget it, and it's still it still upsets me when I think about it too much, because that's not, a beautiful animal that had been there for a few years and going off to start on a breeding program, and then you had to take that action. But these are the
what are the longest animals there is? I remember the last time I met you in the zoo, which was a long time ago now, Judy was there. It was a chimp.
That's yeah.
Is she still there?
No, would you believe Judy died a couple of years ago. She went to Warsaw Zoo in Poland with Lucy, the chimpanzee I raised at home. She was our grandmother. But would you believe, from them 3 chimps, there was Wendy, Betty and Judy. And, Betty is still there in the zoo. She's gone well into her 60s, and she was there since 1962. And she was originally there as one of the Tea Party chimps that they used to take out on the lawn. And, thankfully all that
Yeah,
kind
that's
of...
right. Yeah, they used to dress them up around a table and make tea. Yeah,
Thankfully
yeah.
all that rubbish is there. And she got to live out her life on a big, vibrant, beautiful island, up in the African plains with the rest of the chimp family. So, it was good for her to be able to see that. But she would be the last of that generation of animals.
And how old is she? 62?
She's in her 60s now. She's still there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she's still
And
there.
how long do chimps live?
That's
like
she's
humans, I suppose.
She's getting, they have lived up to 70 in exceptions, but she's on kind of borrowed time now at this stage.
That's
but
sad.
but amazing to see, she's still amazing to see the different stages of her life too, which were very much like my life in the zoo, and the different standards and to where she got.
And the gorilla, of course, who only died there recently as well. When I say recently, it was a couple of years ago there. Harry, wasn't it?
Harry, yeah, again, and magnificent big, and then there was a lot of controversy over Harry and how, and I personally used to go back at night time to look after Harry and watch him with other keepers, and he got the best care. It was actually an aneurysm of the brain that you could have never ever detected, and there was all sorts of allegations against the zoo that were fairly thrown at him, which I actually deal with in the book too. And he was an amazing animal, and he got the best care possible, and it was just one of these very freak things that would happen.
Did you actually were you actually in with Harry in the enclosure when he was in good health? I'm talking about.
No, we didn't have to share the same space with him. When he was very young and he came to the zoo first, my dad did, and another keeper, Liam Reid, that was there. They would have had a close relationship with him. They were looking at him on a daily basis. But you don't, you avoid even now elephants, because in the old days when I was in with the elephants in the zoo, that's called free contact, and you had a hook. And the idea was that the elephant understood the consequence of the hook, that if it didn't conform, it would be pushed into a part of its body. And that was something that we were all usually uncomfortable with. Thankfully now that's banned and it's not allowed. And now you don't have to share the same space. You use positive reinforcement to train them to lift their feet for pedicures, for blood draws, all on their terms. They can walk away if they want, but they never do. They want to engage it. They want to, because they love the time. They get the best care possible, all on their terms, using positive reinforcement. Again, it's all part of this evolutionary process where kindness is the key for animals, and that's what we know. Kindness is the key.
Have you ever been injured, by the way, by animals?
I got a couple of small bites over the years. I got a sea lion bite one time. Nothing too serious, thankfully. But there's been two keepers killed in the history of the zoo, and they were both
in the Irish zoo.
Oh yeah, and actually, one was Keeper McNally, and he was with an elephant. And actually, his family only contacted me recently because they got the book and they wanted me to sign the book. And he was doing a pedicure on an elephant with an abscess on her foot. That was also, as I say, it's well over 100 odd years ago. And unfortunately, she killed him. And there's actually in the notes of the zoo of the zoo at the time, they said the Royal Irish Constabulary was summoned to the park, and the elephant was shot under firing squad. Which is.
So the elephant was shot after the fact.
But crazy.
Which probably would happen now.
Crazy old days. But and then there was another keeper killed by a red stag. But nowadays, again, as I say, the emphasis is on health and safety. The habitats are designed with the animals' biology in mind. They have.
You know what I've never understood? We've such a beautiful country and such beautiful landscape in this country. Why we've never had an open safari park rather than a zoo?
Fota was a version. Fota Wildlife Park. Has large open span spaces for it. But there is a lot of beautiful landscapes that that are there that would suit certain species that you could do. But Fota does a really good job with a lot of the African species, the giraffe and the oryx, and they've been very successful with a lot of their breeding programs too, which is great. And that was set up by Dublin Zoo in the late 70s.
What's your favourite animal, Gerry?
I know, honestly,
you must have a favourite.
No, I do. I love them all, but the elephants, because in human care, we were happy to keep them under any conditions. And when you see elephants and how they operate as a family, they celebrate life. They mourn death. Their investment in the next generation of the herd. It's all about making sure the herd is secure. We could learn so much of them as humans, and how everything has a solid purpose, either defending your family or looking for resources or supporting. But ultimately, it's kindness, and how they look after one another is unique. And that's the great thing, to see them compared to the old days when they were taken away as neonatals. We now have this fabulous dynamic herd of elephants that invest in one another, that care about one another, that elephants are allowed to be elephants now. And as I say, kindness is the key.
Yeah. And is any of your family involved still in the zoo?
Yeah, no, still got a nephew there, and my own work globally. Then my daughter Mia is travelling with me. She was over in France. A great little story, just a quick one. Uppily, which was a bull elephant that left Dublin Zoo 4 years ago. He was the most successful breeding bull we ever had. The keepers rang me from France saying he's not cooperating with us. He won't allow us to do his pedicures because he was in a thing called must, which is a heightened hormone stage males come. Hust is a Hindu word meaning intoxicated. But
I think most lads go through that as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I went over with Mia to see Uppily, and he hadn't seen me in 4 years, and he came right over to the training wall, start rumbling, real deep rumbles, really relaxed, and he's presented his foot for me to do the pedicure on his foot. So it is true, an elephant never forgets.
No, they certainly don't forget. But Gerry, I have to say, it sounds amazing. The book, by the way, I suppose goes through your life being raised in the zoo, because that's literally what it's called, raised by the zoo. And you were raised by the zoo. You're like one of the animals yourself. You've been in there so much. I'm assuming it's not a 9 to 5 job.
No, you never switch off, honestly, and you can't switch off because with the emotional attachment and and honestly, the one thing, as I said, with that in the book, for the 37 years that I was in the zoo, there was not one single day that I didn't want to jump up out of bed and go to work. You know what I mean? And that's what animals do to you. And it's not a 9 to 5 job. It's a very, very rewarding.
Well, I'm sure
job.
you got calls at 4 a.m. saying you better get down here.
And loads of times you'd have to watch in, and as the operations manager before, I was in charge of all the animal departments, and it was a big responsibility, but I just loved it. I loved it, and I just love to see how the zoo is doing and how so well it's progressing, and long may it continue.
And the sick animals, by the way, when animals, like human beings, they get sick all the time, I'm assuming. Years and years ago, it was a case of only having a dog and cat vet come and do their best because that's all they knew. But now I'm assuming that we have better veterinary services when it comes to exotic animals.
Absolutely. There's all across the world, there's an international organisation of vets that would be specific to each species. There's even dentists specifically for animal. The director's wife at Dublin Zoo is actually an animal dentist too, and she can work on tusks or teeth. And you have specialist vets, and there's a whole network of support that they actually put all their data into an animal called ARCS, an animal record keeping system, that if I have a problem at one zoo, okay, let's see how they dealt with it. The information exchange is incredible. The support is incredible, and specialists for every animal, in the world. Because that's what they're so rare. They're so endangered. There's nutritionists, behaviourists, research, the evolution of the zoos. And as I said, people are quite right to question, but just don't live in the past. What I'm encouraging people to do is to look at the role. Like, you could even download Dublin Zoo's 10-year conservation plan off their website, and it'll give you a fascinating insight to the role of the modern zoo and exactly where it's going.
And I do remember another thing from the past as well. The chimpanzees, because of course, just like human beings, they like to have sex every now and again. They're on contraceptives. Is that right?
That's right. Again, like a lot of species are. It was a funny one. Yeah, like I remember too being up with the chimp, talking to the chimps, and these real Dublin women there at a time, and she was saying, "Well, why don't they have babies?" And we were saying, like, genetically, you don't want them to have babies. All
so you just give them the pill.
They get the pill or the coil in, and this woman says, "Yeah, she's on the pill." I said, "Yeah," and I pointed to the male. I said, "It's an awful lot handier than trying to get a condom on him." But
yeah, because there's no other way to do it.
No,
I mean, you don't. It's not like your dog and cat. You don't circumcise animals, do you? Or do they?
No. You can certain species.
Are not circumcised.
No, I know what you mean. I know you can neuter. You can do that. You could do it like we've done it with wolves or certain animals, but you take away the vas deferens, and obviously produces or transfers the sperm, because by leaving them fully intact, for the want of a better word, you keep the normal behaviour. You would still have the dominance. The mating rights would still happen. So psychologically, that's another thing that we've learned, where in the old days they would castrate because it would stop breeding, but now you can actually have alternatives to contraception or selective breeding, but it's at least the animals still get to have some fun.
Didn't I hear somewhere recently that somebody wanted to reintroduce wolves back into Ireland again?
Yeah,
to keep the deer population down.
That's unfortunately, again, it's a good idea, and it would like to be thinking that we could, but it would need, our country's small now, and you would never be any more than a few miles from a village where sheep and dogs and cattle will be. It would have its huge restrictions. There was a talk about doing it in Scotland, but for the red deer population, who have much more in the Highlands, much more vastness. But I think the reality of unless it was in a very selected, managed area of a couple of 100 acres, I'd love to see it working, but I think it would be very difficult.
You wouldn't like to see a wolf walking
would be
through your
very
village.
difficult. Indeed,
It'd be like Dancing with Wolves, wasn't it? That great movie many years ago. You'd shit yourself. What's the most dangerous animal in the zoo, by the way?
Well, you mean they're all? I mean, they can all be dangerous. When you think of the.
Well, is there anyone that you yourself would go, oh God, I'm going to feed this one. I'm terrified.
No, but you mean the carnivores? All the big carnivores are reactionary, and their power is phenomenal when you look at them with a leg of beef or a leg of meat and they crunching through the bones. But one of them that as I said, we spoke about them. The chimps as well. Like they can be. They
very
can
strong.
They're so strong and so intelligent, you know what I mean, and working things out that and there has been some catastrophic injuries of people who were attacked by chimps in the wild or when they go after. And they reckon they're the only other animal apart from man that understands the concept of murder. So what you will see in the wild is like a coalition of males will come together. They'll identify a male from another group. They'll go track him down, they'll kill him, and they pull off his genitals, and it's very like it's a dominance, and then they'll celebrate and the murder. Now that's that's the level of intelligence that I always found wow when you think about that. I'm
going to watch Planet of the Apes tomorrow.
I'm telling you now.
There's a new one coming out,
Exactly.
I think, as well. Yeah, because I do love the chimpanzees. I love the fact that they're so human.
Yeah.
And I've seen great videos online of, people doing things and the chimp telling them to put things through the glass and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's hilarious to watch. Do you miss the zoo itself? I know you're still interacting with animals, but do you miss the zoo?
Yeah, I mean, you become so accustomed to a place, but it was kind of. I lucky enough for the opportunities. The phone just hasn't stopped ringing. I've been to San Diego Zoo, an elephant sanctuary in Tennessee. I've been working with, I've been helping zoos all over the world. So I didn't really have time. But like this role now, with Global Elephant Care and having the opportunity to be a voice for the elephants and create, optimum wellness and care conditions that make a significant difference in their life is very important to me. And as I say, I'm working on some amazing projects around the world, like from elephants that are going to be released back to the wild, that elephants have been taken from the wild that need care and support, and creating these landscapes with destinations and journeys and resources for these animals where that it's the optimal care, that they're not standing around anymore. I love what I do now because with the old days you'd walk by with the animals or even elephants would hear you rattle your keys and they'd be running over to see where the keeper was because that was the highlight of their day. Maybe something was going to happen. Now we have these amazing landscapes where elephants have mud wallows, overhead feeders, automated feeders that got released food over 24 hours, and I'd walk in the morning out to these places and they'd look at me and they would have no interest because there's so much resources available for them to have appropriate elephant behaviour that I've now become insignificant in their life, which is wonderful. That means you're doing a good job.
And in relation to where the animals are still being sourced, of course there was controversy many years ago about how the animals are sourced or where they're sourced from. Are animals still taken out of the wild to
now,
go into zoos?
It's very, very, very rare now because even when you talked about AI and electroejaculation, they can go out to the wild. Like they've gone out to the wild now to sedate bull elephants and big cats and take sperm or eggs from them in the wild. So it doesn't happen. It very, very rarely happens unless it's a critical situation where there's only one or two species and they've taken certain species of vertebrates back out and tortoises like in China to it was at a critical point where there was only literally only a couple of individuals left. But that very, very rarely happens.
That's tortoises?
Yeah, there's in the river.
Do you remember tortoises years ago? They were really popular. People used to have them in their houses.
Sure, yeah, that was one of the things too, about how the power of medium and the Ninja Turtles, that was on. And every day, we'd find turtles in a box outside the zoo where people got them for the novelty because of the Ninja Turtle craze. And we'd have to, they were dumped into the zoo lake. There's actually still some of them, and they're an invasive species now. They don't help our own aquatic life. There are in lakes and rivers around Ireland, would you believe?
Yeah, because of all the people that were getting rid of them.
The trend
they breed.
The trend was there. They would leave them outside the zoo gates, or they were actually some thrown into the zoo lake many years ago too.
Real people, real opinions.
Real Talk Radio, the multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.
Ireland's classic